Right, so get ready because we're diving into a case today that is really um, both incredibly disturbing but also just wildly complex.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Pelicot case out of France. And, it's one of those stories that it's not just making headlines, but it's really kind of forcing everyone to have a conversation,
Mm.
about consent, betrayal, like really just the dark side of human behavior.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
the kind of stuff that makes you really question everything.
Absolutely. And I think what's particularly fascinating and honestly horrifying about this case is that it shines a light on the vulnerability that I think we all kind of have, but we don't really think about, that often exists, even within the intimate relationships. Like,
Right.
we always think of home as being the safest place.
Right, absolutely.
But this case really throws that idea out the window.
Yeah. It really does, and it makes you realize like just how insidious crimes like marital rape and chemical submission can be.
Yeah.
They often like fly under the radar, hidden in plain sight,
Right.
which is what I think makes this case even more shocking.
It's true.
So you have Dominique Pelicot, a 71-year-old man who has confessed to drugging his wife Gisèle
Wow.
for over a decade,
Oh, my God.
and it gets worse.
Okay.
He then orchestrated her rape by dozens of men that he met. Get this online.
The scale of this is it's staggering. We're talking 50 men implicated in this case.
I know.
And the fact that he found these men in an online chat room called without her knowledge, I mean, it sends chills down your spine. It
My
really
God,
does.
it's bone-chilling, honestly.
Like, what do you make of that choice of words, by the way, without her knowledge?
I know, it's like those involved were fully aware that they were engaging in something that was morally reprehensible.
Yeah.
And this detail about the chat room really speaks to the dark side of online platforms, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
The way they can be used to enable and even encourage this kind of horrific behavior.
For sure.
And it gets worse.
It gets worse.
It gets worse because Pelicot filmed these assaults, claiming that he did it for pleasure and for insurance.
Mm.
When I read that in the article, I mean, how can someone be so calculated and cold?
I know. It's chilling. It really points to, I think, that level of premeditation and that just lack of remorse.
Right.
At least until he was caught.
Right.
But, I mean, his actions show a complete disregard for his wife's autonomy, her well-being, treating her as an object for his and others' gratification.
Right. Right.
It's dehumanizing, to say the least.
And what makes this whole thing even more heartbreaking is that his wife, Gisèle, was experiencing severe memory loss and a whole host of health problems because of the drugs that he was giving her.
Oh, my gosh.
Imagine thinking that you're developing Alzheimer's, when in reality, this horrific scheme is being perpetrated against you.
It's awful.
It's devastating.
It really highlights the insidious nature of chemical submission.
Yeah.
You're robbing the victim of their ability to consent, to understand what's happening to them, to even seek help.
Right.
It's a form of control that's often invisible, but the impact on the victim is incredibly profound.
And to think this went on for over a decade.
I can't even imagine.
A decade?
Yeah.
It's hard to fathom the level of betrayal involved here.
It really is.
The article, I don't think, really does justice to the emotional turmoil this must have caused her.
Absolutely. It really underscores that abuse can happen anywhere, even in what should be the safest place, their own home.
Right.
And so it's crucial. This is why it's so crucial to be aware of the signs, both for ourselves and our loved ones. And if you're listening to this, you're not alone.
Right.
There are resources available and people who care.
And speaking of resources and support, this case has ignited a firestorm of debate and outrage in France.
I bet. Oh, yeah.
People aren't just talking about it. They're taking to the streets, demanding justice for her and for all victims of sexual violence.
Yeah. And I think that public reaction is so significant in this case.
I agree.
It really speaks to a growing awareness, I think, and this refusal to tolerate these kinds of atrocities.
And a lot of that has to do with her courage in coming forward.
Oh, absolutely. And not just coming forward. She waived her anonymity.
I know, it's amazing.
And made the decision to make this trial public.
I know.
Incredibly brave, considering the stigma that's still attached to these cases.
Her legal team was quoted as saying that she wanted to shift the shame back onto the accused.
Wow.
And I think she succeeded in doing that.
I think so too.
By sharing her story, she's not only given a voice to her own suffering, but I think it's empowered countless others to come forward and share their own experiences.
It's amazing. It's incredibly powerful.
It is.
And it sparks that conversation about consent, abuse, accountability, like we were saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a pivotal moment, I think, in the fight for justice and equality.
Absolutely.
People are waking up to the realities of marital rape and violence against women, and they're demanding better laws, better protections, better support for survivors.
It's true. It's true.
And this case, as horrific as it is, might be a turning point in how we as a society address these issues.
And speaking of addressing the issues, let's dive into the trial itself and some of the arguments being presented.
Okay.
We're talking about 50 defendants here, and not all of them are admitting to rape.
Wow.
That's right. Some of them claim they were manipulated by Pelicot, led to believe that Gisèle was a willing participant in some kind of erotic game.
Oh.
They claim they were unaware that she was drugged and unable to consent.
Wow. So it's a whole other can of worms.
It is.
Now we're talking about the role of deception.
Exactly.
The responsibility individuals have to ensure they're engaging in consensual acts,
Especially online.
especially in the online world.
Yes.
You're right. It's so murky.
It is. You hit on such a crucial point.
Oh, really?
It's not enough to simply assume consent,
Right.
especially when you're interacting with people online.
Especially online.
The potential for deception and manipulation is significant, and this case really forces us to ask ourselves some hard questions about what it means to give and receive informed consent.
I agree. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and this is where things get even more complicated.
Yeah, you can't just take someone's word for it.
Right.
Especially in a situation like this where there's a clear power imbalance.
Right.
And this is where this whole concept of informed consent, it's so essential because it requires a genuine understanding of the situation and the ability to freely choose to participate.
Right.
And clearly, with her being drugged, that element of free choice was completely taken away from her.
Absolutely, and then you factor in the online aspect of it all.
Right. Where he's meeting these men in a chat room, specifically named, without her knowledge.
I know.
I mean, how can you interpret that other than a deliberate intention to prey on someone who is unaware and unable to consent?
It's awful.
It's sickening.
It really exposes the dark underbelly of what can happen online.
Yeah.
That anonymity, that perceived distance, it can create a sense of invincibility.
Right.
And embolden individuals to do things they might never even consider in face-to-face interactions.
It's a scary thought.
It is.
And it makes you realize how important it is to be vigilant, not just for ourselves, but for, other people who might be vulnerable online.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about him for a moment.
Okay.
The article mentions that he confessed to being a rapist.
Even using that word himself and pleaded for forgiveness from his wife and his family. What do you make of that?
It's complicated, isn't it? Because on the one hand,
Yes.
you have him admitting to these horrific crimes,
Right.
acknowledging the immense harm he's inflicted.
Right.
But then on the other hand, he also claims to have never hated her, even going so far as to say he loved her immensely.
I know.
And it's like, how do you reconcile those two things?
It is. It's like he can't, or maybe refuses to, fully grasp the gravity of his actions.
Right.
Like he's trying to hold on to some twisted version of reality where love and abuse can coexist.
And that's, I think, where we need to be cautious about conflating love with possession and control.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Because his actions point to a warped perception of love, one that's rooted in power and dominance rather than respect and empathy and genuine care.
It's classic abuser's tactic.
Exactly.
To mask the control and manipulation under this guise of love.
Right. Exactly.
And then, as if this whole thing couldn't get any more complex, the article throws in that he also revealed a history of childhood trauma,
Oh, wow.
claiming he was abused himself.
Oh, gosh.
Makes you wonder, does that change anything?
I mean, it's significant information, no doubt.
Right.
Trauma can have a profound impact on an individual,
Of course.
shaping their worldview, their behaviors.
Right.
But, and this is important, it doesn't excuse or justify his actions.
Right. Of course not.
Recognizing the impact of trauma doesn't diminish his responsibility for the choices that he made
Right.
and the harm that he inflicted.
It's not an excuse, but it's maybe another piece of the puzzle
Right.
in trying to understand the why behind his actions.
Sure.
But even if we start to understand the why, it still doesn't excuse the what.
Exactly.
And his lawyer was quoted saying that he was sharing his truth,
Right.
which is a phrase I'm always a little wary of.
Yeah, I get that. It's tricky.
It's tricky because, yes, it's important for people to confront their pasts,
Of course.
to take responsibility. But sometimes
Yeah.
saying that almost feels like a way to try to garner sympathy or downplay the severity of what's been done.
Exactly. You take the words right out of my mouth.
Ultimately, it's up to the court to determine the truth in all of this.
That's true.
The truth of his actions, the validity of his claims,
Right.
to what extent his past may have influenced his choices. but most importantly, to hold them accountable
Accountability, yeah.
for these crimes.
For sure.
But this case also forces us to zoom out a bit, don't you think?
Yeah.
And really examine these systemic factors that allow these kinds of crimes to happen
Yes.
and to go unnoticed for so long.
Absolutely. It's like, how did nobody notice her condition?
Exactly.
Like, how was he able to deceive so many people for so many years?
Right. Like, it's chilling to think this could be happening
Yeah.
in what seem like ordinary communities, families, friend groups.
Totally.
It makes you wonder how we can create a society where victims feel safer coming forward
Right.
and where these crimes are caught sooner.
It takes all of us, right? Like educating ourselves, educating others about the signs.
Right.
And not just the physical signs, but like the more,
Subtle.
the subtle ones, the ones that are harder to spot, the psychological ones.
Yeah, and fostering a culture where when survivors do come forward, they feel
Believed yeah.
and supported, right? It's not about pointing fingers. It's about
Totally.
creating this safety net,
Creating a culture of support, yeah.
creating a world where consent is just non-negotiable,
Yes.
where victims are empowered to speak up and perpetrators are held accountable.
100%.
And not just legally, but socially.
Yes. Yes.
Challenging these deeply ingrained societal norms and power imbalances that allow these cycles to keep going.
Yeah, because it's a big task, but this case really shows just how important it is to do that work.
It does, because this is about so much more than just one woman's horrific experience.
Right.
It's about confronting some, I think, really uncomfortable truths about our society,
Totally.
about power dynamics,
Yeah.
about how we perceive and understand consent.
Yes.
And I think just about the dark potential that exists within human nature.
It makes you think, how do we create a world where this is just unthinkable?
Right.
Where victims feel safe sharing their stories, holding perpetrators accountable. How do we do all of that?
It's a lot to unpack,
It's a lot.
but they're questions we can't ignore.
We can't afford to shy away from them.
Right. The Pelicot case, as difficult as it is, I think it demands our attention.
For sure.
It compels us to take action, to educate ourselves, to work towards creating a society that truly values consent, respect, justice.
Well said. Yeah, the Pelicot case really is. It's a stark reminder of the complexities of human behavior, the importance of consent, and how far we still have to go to create a world that's truly safe and just.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
It's been heavy, complex, and honestly, at times, just deeply unsettling.
For sure.
But they're conversations we need to be having.
Absolutely, because knowledge is power, and understanding these issues is the first step in creating meaningful change.
Couldn't have said it better myself, so to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.
We know it was a tough one,
It was.
but we hope you found it insightful
Yeah.
and thought-provoking.
Absolutely.
And remember, these conversations don't end here,
They don't. Keep them going.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, keep the conversation going.
Yes, exactly.
Until next time.